Hans, I don't know if this is outside of scope for what you're talking about today, but one of the terms that you guys use a lot that is confusing to me is declarative. Don't really understand the term.
No, so that it's not obvious, but it's sort of when it comes to languages, there's the distinction between. You need to take that, or there's a distinction between imperative languages, which are the traditional coding languages where you explain what to do in every step, and then the functionals that are more like derived from mathematicals, from math to do that something needs to end up in something else all the time. And when it comes to the declarative aspect, it's how much you explain what kind of result you want versus how much you explain what to do. So it's a spectrum going from I just say what I want in a very declarative manner, like I want pizza tonight. That's declarative. And the other approach is, let's go out the door, let's go and get the car, let's drive to the pizza place, let's order a pizza. And that's the imperative way, not very declarative. And the effects that comes by being on different levels on this spectrum is that the more declarative you are, the more you leave the solution up to someone else. How should it be done exactly? Well, I don't care as long as I get the pizza. But when you're very imperative, you're very into the details, that we're going to do this, we're going to start a car. But why am I going to start a car? Because I want pizza. So that's the whole spectrum. And as we're moving towards more and more declarative and leaving more and more to someone else to decide, the room for optimization increase. It's like one example I often use is if I tell my son to go and buy one cracker, he will go off to the convenience store. It's like 15 minutes away, and I will come back with one cracker. And then I say, I want another one. So it will take enormous amount of time to get the whole pack. If I have just say that we need crackers, and he would implement it another way. He would buy the whole packet at one time. And a good example, which you probably are familiar with already, is SQL. So SQL. When you type SQL commands into a database, you're very declarative. You just say what it is that you want as the result set, the tuples you want, and what tables should be compared to which with the join criteria, and then you hit go. And then it's off to the database, and the database gets to just analyze what you want done, and then check all the indices and see, are there any optimal ways to get this? So, and that's not, we tend not to think about that SQL has been like this all the time, and that's made possible for SQL to stay pretty static since 92. Not much has happened to SQL language since then. There's a few new data types and things like geometrics and things like that, but all in all, it's the same. And how can that be? Because databases have evolved enormously since 92. They are a lot faster than then. And that's because we have left all the optimization up to someone else. Lars, you want to fill in something on?
Well, I don't know. I think it's pretty much that. And then what we're trying to do, and that's why we talk about it, is of course, instead of having SQL, we have view models. That's one way to declare instead of saying exactly how it's supposed to be done. And we're basically trying to put a layer on top of the SQL server, right, with view models. And because like the optimizer for the view model, we can tinker and tweak and work on that one. And no one with the business knowledge needs to care. So that's what it's about, really. And
so whenever we add an attribute to a class in the model that's persistent, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done in the different tiers of an information system. The database needs to get a column. The business layer needs to have a place in memory to store this. The UI needs to be able to display it. And we don't have to explain every detail. We just declare that, hey man, we want an attribute. Done. Someone else can take care of that.
Well, one thing that I find a little surprising sometimes is that you can at least feel sometimes that there is a pushback against declarative stuff among developers. It's like, yeah, but you know, the real stuff, that's C# code and for loops. But then, yeah, at the same time, we say like, yeah, we use HTML. Well, that's kind of really declarative in the sense that you don't tell the UI engine of there's no pixels anymore, right? Basically, you just declare a page. And if you look at it, for example, also from the perspective of how it's implemented, we actually tweak the DOM of the browser on the fly instead of actually telling the code what we want to be changing, because by now we trust that the diff functionality in the browser is actually better at doing that than we are as human beings, or let's offload that whole thing to the graphics engine. But at the same time, we get this we have a hard time. I mean, we are like the wrong crowd to be saying this to, because you're kind of into this already, right? But to other developers, it's still hard for them to say like, yeah, but it's not actually faster most of the times to do it yourself. The same way very few people today use assembly language, because it's beyond a human being to optimize code well for 12 cores in hyper-threaded environments with memory buses.
No games would access the pixels anymore. They use triangles and leave it up to a GPU to do all the things, and that's very declarative in one way. And of course, if you do a game today, you have a game engine, and that's even more declarative to say that what you want instead of actually doing it. So everything is moving in that direction, but everyone, or a lot of people, are pulling back because it's not like the good old days. So that's, I guess, how it is with most things. News, or what is it they say? Science progress one death at a time.
Are we still recording this?
What? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm joking. Maybe we should be
Yes.
calm on the dying part. All right.
It seems like a double-edged sword that a declarative approach leaves implementation detail to your tools, which means that things that you may not be familiar with are not things
Yes.
you worry about, like the cracker example. ECO does a lot of that kind of stuff in that, it's caching and, handling its updates the way it wants to handle its updates in kind of a just-in-time kind of manner. And that's great, but I think the downside to declarative is it's not as sharp of a sword if you need precision in what you're doing.
No.
But when you do things iteratively, then you make a lot of assumptions in terms of the future structure of the data and how the tool actually responds to what you want. But I don't know that that's any different than, back when, I'm dating myself, but back when Pascal was the big fancy new language, it was all about abstract data types and structural programming.
Yeah.
And that is, in a lot of ways, a declarative system in that, for example,
much more so than C.
Right. So if you had like a subroutine you ran regularly to, I don't know, convert a number to a currency, if the compiler decided to copy that code into each call of it, that was up to the compiler. But from your perspective, you just wrote the one function and reused it.
Yeah. So very, very much so. And we're on a spectrum moving towards more and more declarative, but as you say, as it's leaves, it puts a lot of trust in the tools, that the tools does the right thing, and the tools have thought of everything that you need to do. That either you have the perfect tools that have thought of everything, or you have ways to go beyond the tools once you need, to stay very declarative as long as possible, but when there is something really odd that the tool hasn't the capability to do, that you're able to go past the tool and access the stuff behind. And that's what we do sort of with MDriven and CodeRes, MDriven framework, where you write equally well could write C# code instead of using the OCL expressions. So it's back and forth between that. But what we have noticed is that what ECO had immense problems with is that as soon as you did a lot of lazy fetch in the code, the performance went down. It was really bad because there was a lot of spurious questions to the database, and then latency on that made everything go very slow. What we can do with the declarative view model is that we analyze it and see that, oh, all this stuff is going to be fetched. So as someone has expressed themselves up front and say, this is what I'm going to do, we can fetch everything much more efficient, and then you get to do it. So it's just like 3, 4, 5 database round trips instead of 3,000. And that's an enormous change in performance.
I guess that becomes more important in a distributed environment, right?
Yeah. As soon as you put latency on it, it's and you often don't have latency when you develop. So it's first in production you see it.
I have a thing that I might try out. We have this, the use case is, how do I take Word documents, split them into pieces, and then reassemble the Word document with comments inside. So we have used a product called Aspos for working with a doc in memory. It's very stable. I found it really helpful. And what I want to do now is, well, how do I grab all the pieces efficiently and kind of get them into simple access lists? Because the model is quite you know, spread out with different small tidbits in several places. So what I'm planning on trying is actually generate code from a view model. And I don't know if you've thought about it, but we call it view model class, right? Which and the reason for that is that it's actually like an implied class. You could create a class in C# that is the view model pieces. So what I'm interested in doing is basically then declare a view model and then start at the root and say, hey, fill this view model from this root, and then I'll use C# code to iterate the content and call ASPOs and do processing. But the fetching, and you know, we have the code written, but it's like a ton of for loops and crap. And how do you get that to be efficiently fetched? So we haven't done this really this way, but I just like, why can't we do this declarative too? To just tell the view model optimizer, get this into memory and give me classes to work on. So we'll see. But I find that kind of intriguing as a next step of putting view models to use in code dress.
Well, and the other challenge with iterative coding is that's where your bugs are, right? Your if-then else's, your edge conditions, that's where you screw up.
Yeah, and that's the other effect of declarative, as you only state what your intentions are, what you want. It's much more compact than if you must state every step. So if I need to say every step that's involved in me getting in the car and driving to get pizza, there's obvious room for errors in some of these steps. But if I just express myself with I want pizza, that's very few words. And if someone else can, preferably a machine, can deliver on that, it's very likely to do exactly the right thing every time, at least the same thing every time. So, and that's what brings quality and reduction of repetitiveness and everything like that.
It brings scalability and potential upgradability, right?
Yeah.
How many of us use code dress here? I mean, how many are code dressers?
So in
this group, Bengt Henriksson, do you use code dress?
No, not yet.
Oh. Damien, have you stepped into that area yet?
I don't know what the term means, no.
It's just a way of like putting code on top of our turnkey server. So it's like a light way of including C# code without having really to take ownership of the whole thing as an application.
So instead of recompiling the whole turnkey server, you just compile your model, and then you put your model close to the turnkey server in the correct assets catalog, and then the turnkey server does some reflection of that code and injects it into your model, so that it works just as if you had compiled it yourself. Well, let's round off, and what we should talk about, or what I said on the invitation, was that there's some new features to MDriven Designer, and I wanted to show that. Everyone see my screen, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So, as if you have a large model, and we have been able to filter stuff like this to find things, and of course that's good. And there was different ways of filtering. You could like search in a box like this to see if something matched. but has been lacking a good search function to really find something special. So now Control-Shift-F is bringing up a search window with all these checked initially, and you can pinpoint what you want to search on and how many rows you want to return if you're not going to use 1,000 results. You don't need to wait for them. So if we were to search for something particular, we would find that there's a lot of classes that has this word, but there's also members that contain this word, and there's methods, and there are associations, and we can also find view model columns and everything like that. And if we double click something, we get it filled in so that we see where it was. So that's I think will be a help when trying to remember where stuff are, and especially
that will solve a big problem.
Yeah, and especially for like view model columns, and naming of those has been hard to find in any good way, but this searches more or less everything. And if there is stuff that we don't search or find, let me know, and then we will simply add it and search more, because this is quite easily implemented with I guess that would be a good example to show how it's implemented.
Is this feature searching inside OCL and action language?
Yes, so it's also looking in all the expressions.
Nice.
And
because sometimes you rename something and it's like, had that mentioned somewhere in the comments somewhere, I want to find that and update it.
yeah, so what I'm looking at now is the, let's see, now it froze. Is the meta model for MDriven Designer, and in this we have both the...
So the meta model is the model of the model that runs inside the designer, because the designer is in itself an MDriven application with the model.
Yeah. So there's a class for all the found rows that will be created, and this is created in finding model, view model actions. So this is a view model that defines this search window, and what happens when I press search is all these things that basically do all instances and loop through to see if there's matches on stuff. And if there are matches, it creates the let's see, where does it create? Yeah. It calls this function add found row, which basically is a function on the singleton here that's also defined with OCL, like adding
it's only one scope, the global scope, so you can't press Control-Shift-F in the view model.
Correct, it searches the global scope, and if you're in a view model,
You have the filter.
then we have the filter things, so it's not a super big problem, I think, for So if you want to search, either you have the filter like something like that to reduce what's seen, or you have the control, no, not the control shift, just control F to have things highlighted like this.
Yeah.
Like that. So that's the main new thing that we have added. There's tons of smaller things that has been updated and changed to facilitate. But what I also wanted to talk about was the thing that we called Mockotype. And the idea between to introduce a new concept called Mockotype is to get closer to an audience that might not be developers per se, but rather they are interested in understanding information systems, and that could be different reasons. It could be that they want to, maybe they want to purchase a system or looking for a system, and they need to understand their own requirements for such a system. So it's a natural way to get the grip on complex things, just to understand your requirement set, instead of pulling out Excel and doing 200 lines of requirements. You should model it. So it's a way to get away from the requirements list and user stories, and instead do a prototype to actually execute your requirements. And by doing that, you won't forget what you have learned about the domain. That's the thing that's a real issue for me, at least, when doing requirements in like Excel. Okay, if you have the focus on top of the Excel, that's fine, and you know what it means. But once you have reached line 1000 and someone asks you about line 1, it's out of context, and you have a real problem to get anything good out of that without reading a lot. And that's much easier with models, because everything is connected and it's compiling in some way, type checked, so it's easier to find the reasons. And possibly this would be a good way if you're a developer and you want you're gonna do work for a customer. If you have a model of what the requirements are, then you have also a strict way to know what that you actually agree on the requirements, because as soon as you have the requirements in Excel, there's a lot of different interpretations. Oh, did you mean that this meant exactly what you said now? It wasn't what I read when I read your Excel. I read something else. Yes.
Can I just jump in and say, so the Mockotype name, of course, comes from, we all seen the UI mockups, and then you might not get to the point where we can get people to decide to do a prototype. So what if we could be in the middle of that and say, let's do a Mockotype? That is like a prototype, but also kind of a mockup, because it's might work, and it also illustrates a UI. And so we think that there's a sweet spot there that's actually missing, maybe, or maybe we should do a little bit less of mock-ups and prototypes, because they're on the way to development, but they don't really fully capture neither of the ways, because the prototype is so far into it that you can't reverse what you have started, and the mock-up is just a fairy tale. So that's what this is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. And also as we have introduced MDriven Designer to a few developers, they have almost fallen over because there's too much functionality. How am I supposed to learn all these buttons and what do they do? So Mockotype was a way. Mockotype is actually, it's not something completely new. It's a repackaging of MDriven Designer in a reduced format. So if we continue this, our selling points is to nullify the risk with an online business case. So if you're able to find out the business case, is this going to be a viable thing to do or not, by doing a Mockotype prototype of the thing, you know ahead of investment. So
is it just creating mock-up view models?
Yeah, so if we just download it, then it's
well, it's like, actually, think of it from your perspective. It's a Designer Lite but it's scaled back, so you don't. It's more focused on the Mocko part of it of mockup, but it leans into runnability.
Yeah. So one of the obvious things that differs is that there's a lot of less options. You can only use it for the local turnkey prototyper and XML, and there's no cloud upload button to confuse you that you need to access servers or so. It's just strictly local. There's a much reduced options here and there, but for everyone here, it's good to know that there's actually just a mode on how MDriven Designer is started. So if I were to switch this off, it turns back into the full MDriven Designer. So, but what we want to do with this sort of brand is to get closer to reduce the hurdle for non-developers to learn how to model and how to express themselves with this kind of language.
And Hans, I mean, the same way you could say that we at MDriven wants to sell this as a concept, I think you might be able to sell it as a concept, to take on that kind of work where you say, let's make a mock-up prototype, and then you throw in this thing and you maybe get a discussion going for a new project. Hey, why not do a Mockotype where we try out your ideas in a mock-up that can run basic things? So it might be a way to sell something for you too. That's our hope, at least.
Yeah, and when we go back and see how we actually succeeded to convert a potential client to run the MDriven stack, it has always started with us doing prototypes. We never sell it as, hey, we're having this fantastic stack to run all your business needs. It doesn't work. We just start with a discussion of, so that's a problem for you. Let's see how we will go about solving that. Something like this maybe. And then we find next problem and next problem and next problem, and all of a sudden we are running more or less the full MDriven stack. So it's the way we sell things.
And my hope is that we can have more people that takes a few people in a conference room and you model from there with them, and you go back and forth a few times, and then you have started up some project.
Yeah. So in the air of being light and easier, we have started from scratch with a set of videos for the Mockotype brand, which basically goes down to the basics, explains modeling, explains OCL, and explains view models. So we have 3 such videos today that I think, I hope that they are sufficient to get going, to get the grasp of how we do things and why we do things that way. So, what do you think about that? Having downloaded the Mockotype, it should be easy to just get going like this to have something running.
Well, we have a crowd that only jumps up and down on the inside, I think.
So if you have people...
My comment would be, but it could be a biased comment, is I suspect one of the harder learning curves for someone to engage MDriven is the view model. So if this is helping to bridge that gap and make a view model easier to understand and create, again, that might be just my perspective, because the model-driven side and OCL and that stuff has done it long enough that is of no concern. But the view model is difficult. So if this is making the view model component easier to swallow, one of the things I was actually going to bring up is in Borland Dev Studio, the ECO tools have what they call an ECO object browser that you can include in your interface, and through that you can browse everything in your model, and it's almost a mocked up interface, right? You can go to a given class and see the attributes, and you can type in some OCL and narrow things down and stuff. And it's a useful tool. I use it quite a bit. And so, but I'd always thought, like, why can't we take that and then take what it's already built for an interface as a starting point to make your own UI? So I don't know if that's what we're doing here, but if that is, I think, at least from my perspective, would help manage that challenge of getting your head around view models.
Yeah. So there's this video in this series that is focused on view models, and I think that's I've been careful to not skip over things that I think is obvious, instead doing everything from scratch and explaining most things. And I would love to get your feedback on how well this video would help you with getting over the hurdles to get started with view models, because there are 3 videos in this series. Modeling, you probably won't need that one. And then there are the OCL expressions, you probably won't need that one, but the third one is focusing then on the view models, applying the model and the expressions to get things going on screen. So that could be a good...
So where do we find those videos, Hans?
Yes, good question, because it was sort of hard to find.
Isn't it just MDriven on YouTube?
Yeah, but
the Mockotype page. I had a question for you, Damon, and that was, so when you have that, I think I remember what you're referring to when it comes to this model thing in Borland, although it was many years ago. So how does that compare to the debugger in Turnkey? In the Designer now? It has most of the functionality, I think. And then have you looked at the there's something like that in the MDriven server. you can, write OCL and you can navigate around in all classes and search and find and open.
I can't answer that question. I haven't spent enough time in MDriven. My challenge is I have so many hours a day to program, and most of the time it's in the old code base, and I need to be making that jump at some point, and I'm anxious to do so, but most of my brain power is focused on the older stuff. So it could well be that, and what is in Borland is not necessarily great. It just sort of seems like a good starting point for building UI. That's all.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to so when you get to that, you wanted to mention, that the debugger is, and I don't know if we can open the debugger within, but I guess we can, right? Some Win32, Windows software could open the debugger to an end user also. But that has a lot, and I think, by the way, Hans, that we should show the seeker here much more, because I think that's one of the best features ever added to this thing. If you pick a class and then you click on seeker, that's my new favorite here, because I have much more ease of use to just pick something and then the seeker, and then you seek for whatever you want, and then you can click on an object and go and look all over the place. I find it super good.
Yeah, but for the internal debugger, the classes are not persistent in that way, so that doesn't work that. But once we get something up, we get the autoform function, and this is just a view model derived from all the things that are in the model, and you can follow like single links to and multi-links to find, so jump around all the stuff here.
So this is in the meta model of the designer itself, but if you have your MDriven server or any system running, you can use a seeker the same way the seeker is for your end user data. This is like a generated seeker with a complete UI, and you can do all the things and find the data and delete and update, and then you can drag your objects that you've found to the OCL expression and then write code from that point, from that object. You have been working on this for a very, very long time, Hans, but I think the seeker here really gets me to the feeling it's almost as good or as good as having direct access to the SQL server, because you can easily find your root object to your debugging session or whatever you want to find, and then from that you can understand what might be wrong in your data.
Yeah. So and that's the main way to find the strangeness with the data in production, is that we usually connect the debugger to the production system and search for a specific object, drag that object to being self on this expression, and from there having access to the complete model of what's available for me here, to select stuff and watch stuff. And whenever I get an object back, I can go into that view and look at that, and I can take the green dot and put it as self somewhere else. So there's a lot of things you can do once you're here.
I used it also to, if you want to correct something, like a one-time thing, then my default was to go back to the SQL server. But if you find something here, you drag the object, or you have a collection, the result collection, you can just use it and write some EAL action language code that does this update for you. And then if you want to see what happened, you have the dirty list here also. You can inspect the dirty list, see what was it that exactly that changed. And you always have the undo feature here too. So you can test and see, no, not right. And then you undo and you write your code again. And very, very flexible. So try it out if you haven't used it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get back to you, Damien, because I promised to help you with the VIN number thing that I'm going to do.
Well, I'm still talking either you or Lars into an American vacation so that I can steal lots of your time. We'll work on that.
That would be nice. It was a long time since I crossed over.
We have a more travel-friendly president today, so that might be helpful.
Yeah. What happened to the other guy?
You don't want to know.
I have some feedback on the videos. I think you should try a different approach, more like a promo video. That's you have an example of like to-do app or some really simple app, and this is what we are going to build, and then you build it rapidly. It's more like a not explanatory video. It's more like a promo video, a teaser, and then
point into
if they're interested, then they
explain.
can look at.
So good feedback. We need to find a way that works. So it's always
So it's testing different videos. If they
Good feedback.
or not.
And are there any wish lists for coming sessions? Gonna run these sessions bi-weekly now. So
I have more specific stuff, but that's more one-on-one, I think. Take expander and waiting for data. Placeholders or
Did we mention that we asked you like what should we do with the left menu and all that? And if you get one of the later frameworks, I can just mention that now we have started moving away from putting everything in the left menu, and you have a right-click feature instead. Although Macs have a problem with right-clicking, both because of right-clicking is alien to Macs, it seems, but also the browser implementation seems troublesome. But we're trying to move. Sorry?
mobile devices.
If you touch on mobile devices, you will get a menu on screen, and you have these dots to the right there. That is for mobile devices. So we're trying to move in this direction because we think that eventually we'll move away maybe from having a prominent left side menu, and we're working towards more and more autosave in the UI, and then hopefully we can save space on screen by removing the left menu thing. But it's we have to feel our way forward, so but that's work in progress.
But things are moving in a consistent direction, I think. And you, Bengt, you have been doing quite a few things with the tag
expander. I've been doing, and I run it on the local server, and maybe some issues is just about that, but I don't know, because sometimes you get some latency, and when you go from like a list view to a document view, it will take like 1 second or something to populate all the data, and if almost all the content is from tag manager expander tags, it will be pretty empty. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
maybe I need to have an event and a loader if the loading is not finished. Angular.
Yeah. How the page should look before any data is available.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm quite a little bit surprised because it's not that much data and will like have a bit of latency between switching screens from list to document.
Yeah, I can't say what the holdup is. I don't think we have any. I don't know.
I think I need a demo.
Yeah.
And what's more, it's when the app timeouts
Mm-hmm.
is dead.
You mentioned that if someone has this on its phone and then puts the phone away, this won't get any feedback on to the server that it's alive, so the server will throw away the cache. And once this gets back alive, it will blink because it will reload everything. That's basically the description, right?
Yeah. And maybe I have a link, a list with a link that trigger an action, and the view is there, so I click the item in the list, and it will try to do the navigation.
Mm-hmm.
But
that was
it will be an awkward experience for the user that don't know what's happening, and it will take like a few seconds for it to get live and show something.
Mm-hmm. You could probably mimic the behavior that you're looking for by opening two screens and having the debug mode on and doing like a reset on one, then the other one should be reset as well. And now this is not really alive, so it will blink.
Yeah,
but
it will not just blink, it will take a while.
But what you need to do is to compile much simpler examples than your whole complete system, because that's too much to delve into. So if you do things like this, one trick is to have two windows and shut the application down, as this is possible nowadays by this very good button. You can get the effect repeated.
Yeah, and if you have a search view and it will take a while to get the result, and I want to show progress or spin or something during the searching, if it feels I try to put in the search action like a flag, like searching is ongoing.
Mm-hmm. So you need to divide it up into two actions then. First that the flag is set first, and then it will be set until the search is done. But
you can put it in the same action.
No, in the same action it will be like one atomic. So
okay.
So I guess it's better to split it into two somehow. Yeah, time is up, so we're not going to respect everyone's time. Thank you very much for showing up tonight, and hope to see you going forward.
Good luck with all the projects.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks.